Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be diving in a little bit into how ChatGPT works. I'm going to dive into some technical concepts, but don't worry, this video is very much made for those who don't have any software engineering background, have never written a line of code. I truly understand that some of this can be very complicated, but I wanted to make a very simple video so that anyone can pick up a little bit of the workings about ChatGPT and artificial intelligence. If you're new here to the channel, my name is Christian Bedoya. I'm a software engineer based in Los Angeles. So before we dive into ChatGPT specifically, I wanted to give you just a general background of how machine learning has evolved over the years. You'd be surprised that a lot of things about machine learning and artificial intelligence is not really like fancy software. It's really just a bunch of very statistical math programs. Like it's just a bunch of math. In fact, during my machine learning classes in college, 75% of the classes were based on just like learning the math, learning the statistics, and then 25% was actual coding. So let's start by taking a very high-level overview of how all these machine learning models get put together. Those fancy statistical math models that I keep mentioning will be represented by this cube right here. So what happens in what's called the training period, the engineers and scientists take a bunch of data and use that data to help train the model. And so the model is just grabbing that data and trying to find patterns in the data. Again, this is just using a bunch of fancy statistics and math formulas. So then what happens is that we give it some input. We ask the model to give us a prediction on something. That prediction, we note the answer of what it should be. So the model spits out what it thinks it's correct, and it's actually manually validated by humans. And the humans will say, yes, that prediction is correct, keep going, or that prediction was wrong, let's go tweak some knobs on the model, let's make changes to the model until we get this right. So let's take a look at a famous example to kind of grasp exactly what this is. So probably one of the most famous example was this classifier of cats, dogs, and birds. So essentially what happened was that these scientists fed in this model a ton of pictures of different types of birds, different types of cats, different types of dogs. And the humans would help the model classify these pictures and help the model pick out patterns. So the idea was that when it got presented a different picture of a dog than what it was used to, the learning algorithm, the model, will be able to say, oh yeah, I recognize this, that is a cat. And then the human will be like, no, that's not a cat, go back and fix yourself. You can think of this almost as being like when you go into the shower and you just open your knobs randomly and you'll be like, oh, this is too hot, this is wrong. Then you turn it the other way and it's like, oh, this is too cold. Then you would kind of adjust that until you got it to the right temperature. That's essentially what this is. But think of this as now as these models have thousands of hundreds of thousands of knobs that as you fed it more examples, you would be able to kind of train it to be able to pick out the correct things until it got to the point where you can feed it any picture of a cat and it will be able to tell, yes, that is a cat, you're good, and we're ready to go. So that's a little basic explanation of how we are able to train computer models to be able to predict something. Now, what happens next is actually kind of hilarious because in these days, ChatGPT is doing really well and Google is kind of freaking out. But if we look at the history, you'll see that a lot of where we are today has to do with Google. To back up, OpenAI was actually founded in 2015 with a lot of its early employees coming from Google. And so later on in 2017, Google published this paper called Attention is All You Need. And this was basically talking about their new model that they've been working on. This new model that we talked about in this picture, they had created a new model called the transformer, which basically was based on the self-attention mechanism. And I'm not going to cover self-attention mechanism in this video because it's way too complicated. But basically, what this paper outlined is a new model that you can feed into the system. And they were showing off how like, hey, this is actually working really well for us. And the big thing about this new model is that it allowed for a lot of parallelization, meaning you can do training much faster. You can go through this loop much faster and you can feed in more data so that you can get more accurate results. So at around this time, OpenAI was already 2 years old, and the guys at OpenAI were like, let's take this and see what we can do with it. This is a screenshot from the Google paper. I'm not going to dive into this very complicated diagram, but basically OpenAI took this model and made it the basis for the ChatGPT that we see today. Essentially, ChatGPT is broken up into two parts. The first part is this first part here, which is really just to say, It's a bunch of fancy code used to translate what you ask. Let's say you were typing into ChatGPT, can you help me write an email to my boss asking for a raise? This first part of the code, its job is to be able to take that phrase and get some context of what you're asking it. So in that example, its job is to pick out, okay, you are asking me email advice for your boss involving money. That's essentially what it's kind of being able to do, is to pick out and being able to put it into a way that it can understand. Then all of that is fed into the second part of the system, is basically a bunch of code that is used to help you come up with the answer to what you ask. So this is the part that actually helps to generate that email message that we talked about. And to put everything into context, this is where the GPT in the ChatGPT name comes from. The generative means that it's actually generating something on the fly. Like everything that ChatGPT creates is not something that you can put into Google and find it where you found it on the internet. It's kind of generating it on its own. This pre-trained, this is essentially what this code base is. You can think of this as you have to learn the alphabet before you can learn how to make words. Or even take an example even further. If you wanted to learn another language, Spanish, you need to go through your own pre-training, learning how to conjugate verbs, knowing the vocabulary, knowing the different grammar pieces, before you can go in and make sentences, and before you can say, ¿Dónde está la biblioteca? This is the pre-training, and that's what is the pre-train in the P in ChatGPT. And of course the transformer is basically due to the fact that this whole model is the transformer model that is based in that Google paper. Okay, so what ended up happening was actually really funny, because essentially OpenAI took some of that technology and that paper that was made by Google and took that model that was very much a discovery and started developing their own GPT models. So they started with their GPT-1, which was able to do a little bit of phrases. They were able to train it on a small set of data, and it can do very basic tasks. And so they said, okay, this is going well, let's make another one. So they basically made their second iteration of it and gave it a lot more data and a lot more input and a lot more feedback, and were able to kind of get better responses. And finally, they were able to get to the stage of like, okay, let's feed it a lot more data than that. And this one took a lot more time, but they were able to feed it a bunch of data with a bunch of different parameters, a bunch of those different knobs that we talked about earlier. And they tweaked it ever so slightly and were able to make it through. Once from there, they tweaked it ever so slightly and were able to get to a point where they were really happy with it. They adjusted it a little bit and made their 3.5 version, which is just slightly different from GPT-3. And then after that, they said, I think we're ready to show the public this. So then they decided to make their website, their OpenAI chatbot website, so that people could go in and type in whatever questions they can to this model. And that's where we get ChatGPT. All of this you can kind of think about like Pokemon. Like GPT-1 was a lot like Charmander. It was very simple. It could battle, it could do little things for you, but you wanted the next best form. And so you had to feed in more data, you had to train it, you had to be able to win more battles with it to get to the next version of GPT, which is GPT-2 in this case. But even then, that was just okay. And so you wanted to be able to continuously train it and feed it more and do more. And you wanted to get to your third level, which is Charizard. And Charizard, that was the guy that was going to be able to take us to the championship. That was the guy that they said, you know what, we're ready to show the public. This is the most powerful that we can get up to this point. And then from there, they were able to say, you know what, let's make ChatGPT. Now, even at the time of this video, we have just been introduced to ChatGPT 4, which has actually been even trained on a larger set of data and could take bigger inputs and is able to do a lot more impressive things, like now doing a lot more image processing. Now, to put into full context, all of this training that we've had to do, that we talked about in this picture, takes about a year to complete, which is why when you think of ChatGPT in its current form, it says it only has data up until 2021, because at that point, OpenAI stopped taking data into 2021 and then started training its models within the next year so that then it could release ChatGPT in the late 2022 era. So hopefully that gives you a little background of how ChatGPT works and a little bit about how we got here. If you found this video helpful, please make sure to share with your friends and hit that subscribe button. It really helps out the channel. If you want to see more videos about ChatGPT, click right up here. And if not, I will catch you guys on the next one.